Well, good morning. Welcome to another week of Sunday Recap, where we talk about life and faith based off of our sermon this past Sunday. This past Sunday, Elliot was not even watching, I just found out. So
I was not.
I'm assuming he's gone back on YouTube and watched it. If not, we'll see what happens.
I did.
He did.
I did with Richie Ray. She listened to.
Good, Richie Ray should listen. That's family worship right there. That's how you do it. Well, Jim is out today. Kendrick couldn't join us again, so you're stuck with the four of us. Sorry about that. Dave is wearing an ice pack. He's got a crick in his neck.
Yeah, baby.
And
I did advise him to go vegan because it limits your inflammation. Hopefully, he takes me up on that.
yeah, Elliot says become a vegan if you don't want to get hurt.
And his illustration was steak. Oh my god!
It was vegan
Dave
steak.
was like,
just didn't
quick,
say it.
Elliot, I'm hurting and I need a quick solution. He said, change your entire diet now.
Become a vegan quick.
Easy, done.
That's so funny.
I'm currently vegan for the next 3 hours.
Yeah, he's not eating anything.
That's right. That's right.
That's funny. I forgot that when we go live, we're not actually haven't started the podcast. We're just live chatting for a few minutes. I totally forgot about that. I was like, okay, time to start. Hello, everybody. Blah blah blah. I'm getting all the cameras reset. It's funny every time we come on, it seems like I have to readjust everyone's cameras to make them look right.
That's
I
weird.
changed my angle to try to get less dark face, more sun
It's nice.
this
yeah.
way.
It's a little more of a not great image. I don't know what's up with your internet, Dave. Maybe you just need to do a reset someday.
Yeah, it's driving me crazy. Because when I do a speed test, it comes out okay. But yeah, it's just I'm thinking placement might be the big issue.
I don't know. It's not a big deal. It's
I've
not
got
horrible.
I've
It's just
got a
weird that
metal
yours
box,
is always.
And I've got, you see that metal Coke box? The internet's inside that window.
Wow.
I
Okay.
was hoping he's in the...
I was
So
thinking
I think maybe
so
the metal
too.
box is missing.
Oh, it could be.
Not
Yeah,
in the
definitely.
box.
It could be
But-
interference. That's a big thing.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
It could be.
It definitely
Metal
could be.
is notorious for signal.
And you've got,
You're
that's
right.
a chimney too. So there's like the metal chimney too, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, wow.
technically yes, but
It's a lot. And then, well, he's outside. I mean, obviously, if you were inside, it'd probably be a lot better.
I don't know.
And they're birds. The birds
could be.
sometimes disrupt the signal.
Yeah.
Just birds.
It's hard to know without being there and looking at it, but it's just very interesting that Chris's image, I see it crystal clear, Elliot's crystal clear, and yours is like 2003 or something.
Oh wow.
Not really.
that's
It's not
it.
that bad. But, well, if
Okay.
anybody's here, welcome to Nothingness Yet. But we'll start soon. I think we're actually ready to go, and we were just talking. I think, right? We're recording. Everybody's done Do Not Disturb, maybe, if they want it.
I did.
How deleted? Go wrong. That's the wrong page. Scripting in my notes. So this week, I actually listened back a couple times. But I still don't think I'll be able to translate what in your notes is actually what you really said. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. Notes were pretty rough this week.
That's all right. No judgment here. No judgment here.
No judgment.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
don't think my notes would ever be as close as yours are sometimes. So. Oh, I'm tired. But we made
There,
it.
Joey.
All right, you ready? Ready?
Ready?
So ready.
Let's do this.
Ready? All right. Here come the kids.
This is Sunday Recap. Sunday Recap. A weekly sermon podcast with Dave, Jen, Chris, and Joey. Good show. Heady ho.
Well, welcome to Sunday Recap. Thank you, children. Joseph, in that video, you need a haircut bad, and we have taken care of it twice since that video was made. So I'm the one who needs a haircut now, and I don't know what we're going to do about that. But welcome back to Sunday Recap, weekly sermon podcast where we talk about life and faith based off of our sermon this past Sunday. Our sermon this past Sunday was still live streamed. We did our best to make it feel more personal for Dave this week. We turned up the speakers and we yelled at him from our seats in the auditorium. You can actually hear it a couple times in the recording. You could hear a few people talking and laughing. But it is still weird. It is still different. But we're still doing it. We're still doing it. We're in our True Unity series, where we're looking at the first 4 chapters of 1 Corinthians. We're actually all the way into the 3rd chapter this week. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. We looked at verse 1 through verse 23, talking about maturity and leadership. So maturity produces leadership was the title of the sermon this week. Any big ideas on your title and choice of making it leadership? I always ask this, and the answer is almost always the text. But let us know.
The text. Yeah, so it's funny, I regretted it a little bit this week. So I'm still kind of wrestling with it. I had less, we spent more time this week working on kind of what's next plans for the church. And so I had less time than normal preparing. So yeah, wrestled with it a little bit. I think, yeah, definitely it was in the text, and, was just trying to move towards the direction of we're all called to be leaders, and that's central to his argument that their misunderstanding of leadership is causing them to be bad followers and bad leaders. And so he had to kind of redefine what leadership is for them.
And what are some reasons you regretted it, and what would you have went with instead? My gut feeling is this cultural moment, kind of. It's a hot topic and a sensitive topic, talking about leadership. I'm just wondering.
Yeah. Well, let me think. I think I should have defined the connectors better. That's all. I think that's my biggest regret. Yeah. So when I went back and re-listened to it, and I connected the dots, but I didn't kind of keep driving it home the whole time. So, clarifying that we're all leaders, even if we're not official leaders, and that Paul uses himself as an official leader as an example of what all Christians are to be. And that's kind of a complicated. It's easy for Christians to go, oh, I'm not a pastor, or, oh, I'm not a commander, or, oh, I'm not a CEO, so this is not for me. And so I think I could have done a better job showing that connection. I gave people too much of an easy excuse to not listen.
I thought of that. Yeah, I thought of that because we've had those conversations, and I think people in leadership can fall into the trap of everybody wants to be a leader. Right. And we know there's plenty of people who are like, no, I'm happy for you to lead. go to town. And that was a good thing of like, we should all aspire to be leaders in some way as believers. So
I think for me, like, I heard you say in the sermon though that we all are spiritual leaders, but I hear what you're saying. Yeah. For me, like with the Great Commission, in Matthew and Acts, I believe like Jesus himself like commands all of us to be leaders, because we have to go out and teach people and disciple them and do all these things, influence them. So it's inherent in our Christianity that we are leaders regardless of position. The very definition of leadership, Jesus pretty much said that's what you're going to do.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say is it comes down to the definition of leadership. Maybe we have a wrong definition of thinking, oh, that's only the people on a stage or leading a corporation or something, right? So what's the correct definition of leadership then?
I think, well, and this is where I was trying to go, which again, I didn't do well. I had 2 sentences that connected the dots, but just growing up. That's it. Just taking responsibility for yourself, and and that by virtue of you taking responsibility for yourself, you end up influencing the person next to you. So I think that's the bottom line of leadership is influence, and it can be formal or informal. As Christians, we're always called to informal leadership constantly, all the time. We're all responsible for it. So I didn't press that hard enough.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool.
I love the influence part, like motivating them to be everything that God wants them to be. I think from a Christian perspective, so yeah, influence is huge.
How
I think the
to
danger
win
of my
friends and influence
title-
people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think the danger of my title by itself could sound like leaders are mature when really it was like following this train of thought that he's going down. People that pridefully grasp at leadership are immature babies, and people that humbly serve are leaders. And that doesn't all come through when the title maturity produces leadership. So, yeah, I wish I had worded it a little bit differently, but it's technically correct, but could give the wrong connotation to people. So.
What kind of title do you think you would have went for if you could change it then?
Ooh.
Let's
Man.
workshop a title right now.
Yeah, I'm moving on to the next one, man. I'm pregnant with the next delivery, so.
On to Cincinnati.
I was actually thinking about something similar to that earlier when you sent your notes this week and you were like, here's a rough 60% note, whatever. I was thinking, man, I wonder if after he finishes his sermon, he goes back and updates his notes. Like, that's what a mature leader would do, would be to update their notes and to save them for future reference and like redo it. And I was thinking the same thing as Elliot was talking about the title. Like, what would you change this title to if you could? I think that's interesting. We don't have to dwell on it though, but I was just joking about mature leaders do that. But
And Dave is definitely a mature leader. He has influenced me to do that. He has told me directly, update your stuff when you finish. Go back and look at it. So thank you, sir.
You'll regret it later. So the benefit I have is having the audio recording, and I'm usually pretty satisfied with the audio. So like if I go and I'll reteach something, I'll go back and re-listen to the audio rather than look at my notes because I kind of learn with my ears. So, but man, for this week, I think I would have connected the dot more with humility, or I don't know.
maturity produces humble leaders.
Yeah,
That's wordy.
growing up and not being a baby means
servant.
you
Servant
servant
leaders.
leadership. Yeah.
Well,
I don't know.
The big idea was that babies aren't really ready for real food yet. Fruit. Where am I? Real fruit either. Don't do that. Real food yet. And as we mature, we become ready for real food. And you're talking about spiritual. And I guess your first point was about the servant leader side of it, right? Which is what you're saying you wish your main point would have been.
Yeah.
I don't know. You want to talk about points? You had what is a leader as your first point. You had why should leaders lead as your second point. And then how do leaders go wrong as your third point. You want to talk about points? Get into it. We're going to be so on topic and straight today without lots of other people.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
So, yeah, I think the setup is you people that think you're a leader are stupid babies. He's pretty brutal. I mean, he's really brutal. And I think that's part of the problem is I pulled the punches. Like Paul was being really brutal and I wasn't able to like sort that out, how to like stick with Paul's original brutality and do it sensitively. So he just hammers people. You're babies. You're nursing babies and you're claiming to be wise, and so then all the lessons follow from there.
That's weird to me a little bit though, because a leader also knows they're a leader too, though, right? So what's the line between a baby who thinks they're a leader and they're not, and a leader who knows they're a leader and acts accordingly?
Every celebrity ever.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what the points are about. So the points are a real leader is someone who sees himself as a servant. If you don't see yourself as a servant, Jesus says you're not a real leader. Number two, or you're a destructive leader. Number two, are you motivated by God's grace, or are you motivated, to build your own following or build your own identity? And the number 3 point, on what was the number 3 point? What is it? I don't have my notes in front of me.
How do leaders go
How'd they
wrong?
go wrong?
Pride.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
pride. Yeah,
pride,
it's all
yeah,
wrapped
yeah.
up. It's all wrapped up together. So, so yeah, I think he's defining it for them. So they're taking leadership, and he's like, "Hey, you think you're a leader, but you're not." You know, like basically, he's putting them in their place.
I found it. What do you think? I mean, I always found this passage fascinating because I always wondered, like, what when Paul says an infant, what foundational, I guess, like text or principles that he consider essential, like how we say we have the essentials of the faith and then we grow from there. I always wonder, like, what did he consider like essentials, and then from there you grow. You know, I know they have preformed traditions and things like that was passed down, but I always wondered what was it to him? Like, what
And
was the
Christ and
basics?
Him crucified, right? That would be, I think,
Right.
the most
Yeah,
basic.
I mean,
Yeah,
I think
I guess that was the biggest
First
thing.
Corinthians 2:2. Yeah, I think that's the deal, and that's why it's so confusing for us because we think meat means complicated, advanced doctrine. For Paul,
Right.
meat is humility in the cross, and
Yeah,
so we
gotcha.
flip that around all the time. You know, we're always flipping that around. Even Hebrews, the way Hebrews talks about it, like, you guys should be teachers, but you know, you're still on milk. So in Hebrews, the guy, whoever that is, Paul's buddy or whoever, is saying the same kind of thing there.
Yeah.
And we just assume immediately, oh, he means advanced, complicated. You should be teaching Greek class, but you're just preaching the gospel. Actually, I think the advanced meat is knowing and living the humility of the cross, the cruciformed life, kind of like completely imbibing it and passing it on and serving it. So that was where I was trying to get back. So the arc of the whole sermon was there's like eating milk, eating meat, and then serving meat, you know, or we'll say solid food for Elliot's for Elliot's benefit. So milk, solid food, and then serving solid food. That's really what leadership is, right? Is serving. And the Jesus example is yourself. Like he's giving himself.
And I think we miss that analogy too if we don't think about food properly, right? Like, food is for nutritional value, right? You're supposed to eat the right amount and expend the right amount. So, like, that's why milk works for a baby, because it's the right amount for a baby and has the right nutrients for a baby, right? But it's not enough to sustain us and to provide nutrition. And I don't know. Also, we don't want to get huge and fat, and so we exercise that and give out the nutrition that we've been given and those type of things. I don't know. I think we miss that analogy sometimes by just thinking, oh, it's good food, it's better, it's more complicated, etc.
Yeah. I also think there's an analogy of self-feeding that's a part of this. A baby is fed, an adult feeds themselves. That was always a big part of the discipleship path for me growing up. The guys at Temple Bible Church always emphasize that a lot, and I think it's a tough analogy because it almost sounds anti-grace, you know, but I think what it means is an active relationship of Jesus. Like you know the Lord is your shepherd, so you run to the good shepherd in your time of need, right? So like Chris used the song Rest this week from Psalm 23. Like that's a grown-up that says, you are my green pastures. You sustain me, Lord. And that's self-feeding. So a grown-up can feed themselves on Jesus by running to Jesus in their need. A baby panics and has to be fed, you know. And so I think maybe that's a way to combine gospel and self-feeding.
Not to completely beat the metaphor. This is just random thoughts from Chris's head and not scripture, but it did make me think of what does a baby do also with food? It like splatters it around and throws it back up, and there's not this like processing and waiting. I just keep thinking about, for me too, like I'm doing a podcast right now, and there's this constant thing in my head of wait and then speak, listen, pray and then speak. It's almost like, you're cooking a steak, take your time. I watch these older saints who are like, I'm going to prepare this meal for you. I'm not just going to be throwing around whatever crazy idea on Instagram. That's a real deal, right? Like there's just people who are like taking milk and splattering it around everywhere. And then you watch these seasoned saints that are like, this is going to take 7 hours for this brisket. And then I'm just going to give you a bite, and that's going to be enough. You're going to go crazy. Anyway, I know that's just totally running with the metaphor, but
so
good.
good.
It is the thing, right?
All right. Well, we are not allowed to talk about food too long, even if it's in the sermon. It's against all the rules of our quarantine habits of our time where we meet together and talk. We all talk about food too much.
Yes.
Speaking of food, though, that one time we got barbecue at Sunday hangout in the lobby, I'm just saying, that was marvelous. That was good food. Well, I have a question from this section about God being the one who gives spiritual growth. And I'm wondering, we emphasize that a lot, and you emphasize it in your sermon. It's not us, it's God, it's His grace, it's etc. But what is our work? What is our part in that? That's my question.
Yeah. So mixed metaphors a little bit. Paul uses plant and water, and then I, by way of application, I use the CPR thing just because it's memorable, and I think it breaks it into clear kind of way for us to understand. Cultivate relationships, plant seeds of truth, and reap faith. And so, I think those are probably the two best ways to think about it. Paul, when he talks about planting and watering, he's basically saying preaching the gospel and then preaching the gospel again. Preaching the gospel to unbelievers who believe, and then preaching the gospel to believers who need to grow in it. And so he's setting up the tension between him and Apollos. Apollos was a much better speaker, or was known for being a much better speaker anyway. And Paul was kind of the pioneer that planted the church. But interestingly enough, there's a reversal when you follow the book of Acts too. There's an interesting thing where Paul comes in and waters, I think it's Ephesus, one of the churches that Apollos had started. Then Paul comes and waters it, after Apollos had planted it. So it's interesting. Their roles were flip-flopped in a couple of these major cities. But they were clearly allies. They were on the same team. And so Paul is, I believe, using them as an example. But it's the gospel. You sow the gospel into people's lives by teaching it, by encouraging them, by acts of mercy. He's going to go on in 1 Corinthians 12 to talk in a lot more detail than my CPR thing of, friendships, truth, and then people have faith. That's pretty simplistic. But he talks about acts of mercy in 1 Corinthians 12. He talks about, leadership gifts and organization and how we serve each other with all these different gifts. So we do all of those things expecting God to actually be the one that transforms people.
That's good. I guess I had a question, Dave. When it talks about building on the foundation with gold, silver, and all these things, and then I think the next one starts talking about it can be burned with fire once it's revealed on the last day or day of judgment. Like, do you have any examples of what, like, I guess in a practical sense, what would gold and silver, precious stones be for us? As servant leaders, what would that look like? I know we're building on the foundation of Christ, but then what would you think it would look like?
Well, I think it's best to try to stick with the text and then move into the big principles. So the text emphasized the like worldly wisdom and oratorical skills. So you can build a following with great communication. And Paul uses this language in other places, how false teachers want followers, they don't want spiritual transformation. So that's always a tension. We can say, if we do these 5 things, we could fill a room or build a crowd, but are we actually planting seeds of gospel and watering with the gospel? Are we actually ministering with the crucified Lord, the message of the cross? So I think to go to the oratory and fancy speaking, you could build a crowd. Everybody thinks you're great. Everybody loves you. Everybody's following you. And it could be like, he's a Christian, so we're Christians, and we're following him because he's a great speaker. but nobody's really a Christian. Like nobody's actually given their life to Jesus and being spiritually transformed. And I think we see that in America all the time, and the history of revivalism has included both extremes. And so, one danger that we can go to is saying, therefore, we should speak badly. That way it'll just be the gospel, and I've tried to point this out. Paul does not speak badly. He's just not relying on those skills. And he's saying don't get swept up by worldly skills of speaking as the answer. But then I think you could take any gift, because he talks a lot about the gifts in 1 Corinthians 12, or displays of miraculous power. He talks about that with tongues and stuff in 1 Corinthians 14. He's saying none of these things are enough. It's got to be the gospel. The gospel is the point. So I don't know if that helps. You could build a big following.
Yes,
you could have a big church with, millions of people, thousands of people, hundreds of people, but are people actually being changed by Jesus? And I think that's what we have to assess.
I like that.
You also talked in this section about our identity and finding it, and you talked about identity not being found in earthly leaders that we follow. Do you think that's tied just to the church, or outside of church type leaders that we follow? I mean, I know in this text he's saying, like, I follow Apollos, I follow Paul, and so that's definitely church leaders trying to find our identity as Christ followers. But do we do that too with outside of the church leaders? I don't know. Just wondering what you think on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we find it in everything, and politics is a big place where we do that. Just anything that becomes your identity. I think for men, it's really a struggle with our job, but it can also be family, right? So for me, coming from a broken home, it was really important to me that I have a whole and healthy family. And so as my kids graduated, that was very emotionally shocking and confusing to be like, oh, my job's over. Like this 24-year journey I've been on is now done. Obviously, I still talk to my kids and still have a relationship with them, but it's totally different. It's a totally different kind of relationship. So yeah, there's just a danger of us finding our identity in what we do, which I think is kind of the same thing as in our club or our tribe or the leader that we follow. What do y'all think? What are ways that we do that in other parts of life?
Well, I can just talk about like my own life. When I retired, I struggled because my identity was not, unbeknownst to me. I really thought it wasn't, but I started to realize that my identity was for being a soldier, and I went to the Army at 19. So that was my entire adult life up to that point was all Army. And that's the Army, took me out of the hood. I got rank and, being a warrant officer and all those type of things. So yeah, it was hard for that first year from going from chief to just Elliot. That was tough. So I had to really be with God about that and realize that my identity wasn't, that was just a pathway. It really wasn't who I am. So it was tough for me. So I can imagine for other people it could be a stumbling block as well if you're not cognizant of it.
By way of application, how do people identify where they're putting their identity, or we would say making idols, right? By way of application, how do people identify that and work on changing that? Because this is the tension I'm feeling in this point is we're saying God's the one who does all the work. God's the one who gives spiritual growth. And I think part of that work is helping you identify it, and once you've realized it, working through that. But I'm just wondering, by way of application, what does this look like for somebody who's like, man, how do I check myself?
I mean, I think one of the best diagnostics is anxiety, anger. So maybe you could say like the emotional diagnostic of violating the fruit of the Spirit. Where does my identity tug away from the fruit of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, self-control, gentleness. What else?
Goodness, faithfulness.
faithfulness. So, so that might be kind of an emotional / ministry, or how I relate to people, diagnostic, my own personal piece. And there's the 10 Commandments. Like, is there a commandment I'm really tempted towards, and does that have anything to do with how I see myself, right? Like, I'll lie for ministry, or I'll lie for my family, or or I'll kill for my family, or there are extreme ones, but I think that's a helpful grid. Do I find myself routinely violating the 10 Commandments or violating the fruit of the Spirit? And if so, what are my trigger points? Is it have anything to do with my identity, my work, how I see myself?
I think one thing actually that's funny that I was struck by on Sunday too is kind of this idea of what practical thing do you think you need to get to, and you don't have time for Bible or prayer, right? Like, I think I feel that every morning, right? I need to get to my to-do list, or I need to make sure this thing's done.
Okay.
So what so for us on Sundays, or every worship team rehearsal where we're getting ready, there's this thing of, well, all these things are broken and all these songs need to be practiced. We don't have time to pray, right? And most of the time we still pray, don't worry, but I feel I'm aware of that tension of like, I've got to get done with these practical things. I don't have time to get to, pray and slow down. And so I feel like that for everybody, probably at some point in your day, you're feeling that like, I can't slow down and trust God because I have to do blah, and so that's at least a start, and that's a pattern. And maybe that's not like you find your perfect category of idol, but you do start to notice your tendencies of self-sufficiency, maybe.
That's true. Man, to add to that, Chris, one thing I've tried to do, I have probably failed miserably, but one thing I've tried to do is this idea of practicing the presence of God, like in everything that you do. So, whatever work, whatever thing with your family, just allowing that to be a form of worship. I definitely don't do it to well, I guess, when I think about it, but it is something that I attempt to do, and I found helpful. And to Dave's point about, I guess, like how to identify idols, one thing I've always admired about Tish is that I always said that typically what you really care about when you introduce yourself, or when you meet someone. What do you tell them? Who do you tell them? What do you tell them you do, or who do you tell them that you are? Right. So with Tish, someone can just continue to ask her what she does, and she won't mention the Army. She won't mention she's a doctor. She won't mention anything. She just said, "Oh, I just work with behavioral health," and that's it. So for her, so I know that is not. She doesn't put her identity in any of those things. So I always found that humbling, learning that from her. So that'll be a practical thing for me. Who do you say you are, and what do you say you do when you first meet someone?
That's good. All right, point 2 was, why should we lead? And maybe we can translate that as to how can we translate that into the new paradigm of, man, I can't find the right notes, but you were talking about, I wish instead of talking about being a leader, you talked more about everyone being spiritually mature forces us to be a leader. So how can we translate point number 2 into that new idea?
Yeah.
Why should I care about being spiritually mature? Why should I? What do you think? Anybody?
This part's tricky because there's the danger of us falling into nothing matters but preaching the gospel. So like, teachers, you're wasting your time. Builders, building houses, you're wasting your time. All we should be doing is preach the gospel. So this point was a little tricky, and I struggled with that, trying to clarify. He is talking about the church. He's not saying that it's wrong to obey, Genesis, where is it, 127, 28 in there, basically what we think of as the cultural commission that, have dominion, be human, spread paradise, build culture. We're still supposed to do that. Like, we're still under those orders. Those orders have not been rescinded. But here he is talking about the life of the church. And so that's where it got a little tricky He's basically saying if you are, as a member of the church, violating the way the church is supposed to be built, you're destroying it, and you will be destroyed. It's like pretty hard warning, but it confuses us because, like I said, we can think he's saying, don't spend any time in any area of your life doing anything but preaching the gospel, when I think he's saying, no, the gospel is what builds the church. What do y'all think?
I would agree.
I need to stop talking so much. I'm not going to talk for the next 20 minutes.
All right. See y'all next week. So in this point, you talked about the foundation of, ministry, foundation of the church, I guess. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the motivation for that is God's grace. So I guess maybe to translate it for me, I'm just trying to make it fit in the new scheme in my brain, and it's not working great. But maybe, why should we care about spiritual maturity, or why should we be a part of the body or something? I don't know. Anyways.
For me, rewards. I mean, the New Testament talks about rewards a lot, and I don't think we talk about it. At least I haven't heard a lot of people talk about the heavenly rewards that you get. And it's not out of selfishness; it's just a reality that Christ has said. As you serve Him and you serve others, there will be rewards in heaven. So I know me and Tish kind of tease each other a lot. Like if she does something and I'm forgiving her, I just tell her, hey, I'm storing up rewards, Or if I do something to annoy her, she says the same thing, because we're practicing, our Christian life. And all these things, everything that you do, like no matter what role that you have, whether it be husband, father, teacher, construction worker, I just believe all those are different contexts that God placed you in to exercise your faith. So you don't have to be a pastor, you don't have to do all of that, but within the context that you've been blessed with, you impact people. And I think that, to me, that's the most important thing. But my motivation, I want my rewards, man. I want mine to be. I don't want to just barely get in there. We'll say escape by fire. I don't want to just be snatched. Like I want to be fully welcomed, like good and faithful, servant or doulos slave. But that's my motivation. I want to hear that commendation.
Yeah, and I think. Sorry. What do you think, Chris?
No, go, Dave. You had a
I
thought.
think that's a difficult doctrine. So I could have spent an entire sermon. I could build an entire systematic theology on the doctrine of rewards in the New Testament. How do we understand it? Because, frankly, nobody understands it. So that's why I was like, do I want to go off on something that confuses everybody, or do I want to, narrowly focus on, okay, here's the main idea. I can't really explain it. I don't really have a lot of details. So that was, I think I veered off on the not saying a whole lot about it because it is kind of confusing.
Well, we do know our greatest reward is Christ, right? So none of the other rewards even compare to that. So really, I think that's what brings us back to the foundation idea, is that that is the foundation of what the greatest reward is Christ.
I think we can't understand how we could possibly go to heaven and have regrets. Like, that just doesn't make sense in our brain. But the New Testament teaches something like that, like right here, So I just think we have to be willing to press into the tension. It's one of those tensions, kind of like sovereignty and responsibility. It's like, no, there's something here. Like, Jesus is going to wipe away every tear from our eyes, and somehow we won't really be sad in heaven. But this seems to communicate some kind of like regret in the process of judgment that is then transformed into everything is awesome,
verse 15, right? If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved. But only
I'm not trying to go through it.
Yeah.
I don't want that.
I'm not trying to go through it.
I want to press forward towards the goal of Christ. I want to be on the podium with the medal. I want that.
Yeah.
So that's my motivation.
Yeah. I'm trying to wrestle through a thing. I don't know really how to say this, but Dave, you were mentioning he's hitting hard on church leadership, and I'm just constantly aware of, in my own mind and the mind of most Americans probably, this just concept of church still just doesn't. Where does this live? Is that something, the question kind of is that something that just church nerds care about, or is that something I'm supposed to care about? You always have the professors in college who are like, they think this subject's the only subject in the world, and they want me to, and it's kind of like, I think that can be so easy for people hearing us talking about church leadership, especially to say, okay, here are the church leaders talking about the thing they love, their hobby. And I guess, again, as we're talking this through, I was just thinking, well, there's even this sense that we're encouraged to share the gospel. And so we can flip on this switch of, okay, I'm going to reach the lost. I'm going to go out there. But then that's like not really connected to church, and church is getting all mucked up because it's a business and it's a large meeting and it's the people and it's the, what building, what is it? And so I guess I was trying to think scripturally. I think the pattern that I'm reminded of is there is this paradigm of reaching the lost and loving the brethren, to use an old King James kind of brothers and sisters. And I feel like that really helps me. So if church is the brothers and sisters of Christ, even our gospeling is sort of, and our leading of non-believers is in this context of them coming into this family. And so our life really is, the reason we're still left here on earth is this fellowship, this family of believers, and bringing more and more people into that fellowship, right? Does that make sense? Like, so we don't disconnect gospeling or being for the lost from this all-encompassing of all of our lives that is, we are God's children. We are called to be, that's our biggest identity. So if that's what church is, then really that does affect every type of leadership. Does that make sense? I know it's really fuzzy, but I'm trying. Maybe you guys can help me unpack. But I just feel like our definition of church in our hearts, maybe even, is different. It's like the thing we think of as church isn't an all-encompassing. We should always be thinking about this thing, but get that right, it can start to be like, oh no, that's the whole point of our life here right now.
Yeah. I mean, Paul flips back and forth throughout 1 Corinthians about how we relate to outsiders and how we relate to insiders, and it's the same problem. Like pride and division makes unbelievers not believe. Pride and division confuses and breaks believers. It's so the problems are hurting believers and they're hurting unbelievers, and so it's all wrapped up together for Paul, for sure. The crucified, the cross is the solution for believers and non-believers.
So then I guess when you say church leader, I would love for people to not think organizational leader necessarily. That's not excluding that, but think leader of my fellow family believer brothers and sisters, helping them and pulling other people from darkness into light. That's the leadership we're all called to, right?
Yeah.
Every Christian is a leader.
To say it all over again, we're talking in the beginning how I was struggling with how I did this. I think I would still have the exact same outline, same sermon. I would just build the case that he's talking to members. He's talking to members, he's talking to members, he's talking to members. It's not, he's talking about leadership to members, because all members are leaders. We're all priests, in the household of God. So I think just emphasizing that seamless connection is really important for Paul.
You're all priests, so act like it almost, right?
Yeah.
I like that, Chris. That was really good, brother.
I'm wondering, I have a note in my notes that I wrote down that you said at this point, is our corporate gathering based on our desperate need for identity? I'm not sure exactly where that fits in this point, or if I just wrote it on the wrong page, but that felt like it hit hard for our current time right now, right? Like we're feeling this strong need to be together, to gather corporately, and what are we basing that on? And so if this didn't fit in this section the right way, then this is my transition to wherever it should fit in. But
so
what do you think?
I was thinking, I'll tell you what I was thinking. I don't remember where it landed, but the point 2 and point 3 flow together in kind of the gospel-centered concept of, do we gather because of our identity, or do we gather for an identity? And, so the gospel-centered or cross-centered, to use the focus of 1 Corinthians 1-4, it's the cross gives us our identity. That's why we gather. That's what makes us this temple of the living God, the presence revealed. So that was kind of what was floating around in my head, and that can be flipped where we're like desperate and we're identity-less, and so we're building churches without an identity. We don't have an identity ourselves because our identity is not in Christ. We're babies, or we're fleshly, or we're worldly, and we're building an identity on worldly things, and that wrecks the church, I think is what Paul is arguing here.
So if we're all connected, I guess I'm trying to see. So as someone sitting at home, worshiping from home, there's just this desperate need to hold on to the fact that I am still a part of a greater whole, even when we can't sit in the same room together, right? That the danger, I guess, that we've always warned against with sort of just only attending online. So before the pandemic, we were wrestling through this, like, don't just do digital only, right? And I think that's because you don't belong to them. There's no skin in the game, right? There's no, like, you can speak into my life, I can speak into your life. Me. There's a disconnect. But now we're in this crazy thing where we can't get in the same room, but there's still this necessity of knowing and reaching out, right? Reaching out in other ways and being known in other ways, phone calls and texts and whatever you can do, and to remember we are connected as a body, if that makes sense. So there's that mindset we must hold on to, that yes, we can watch a video, a live stream, and be reminded of timeless truth and worship together. And all along, we have to keep in mind we are part of each other. We're part of the same body. We are bricks of the same house, right? Is there any other, like, what do people need to hold on to in that time? Is there any other encouragement as far as how we should approach our online services?
Anything more than what you just said? I don't.
Yeah, no, it's okay. That's okay. I feel like I keep wanting to help people unpack. Again, that before the pandemic, we were like, online church is not enough, And so now when we're forced into online church, is it just a remember you and be ready and stay in relationship, right? I guess is what I'm saying. I just don't know if there's any.
I think we're saying the same thing. We still would say the exact same thing. Online church is not enough. You got to connect with people. You belong to people. Jesus loves you. You love other people. Jesus serves you. You serve other people. So all that is still true.
You just have to find new ways to do it.
I was just about to say that. I just have to find a different way to do it.
Let me say it another way. Sunday morning is not enough. We've never believed Sunday morning.
Absolutely.
So I think there's a confusion maybe when we're saying online church is not enough. Does that imply physically going to church is enough? No, that was never enough either. It's never been enough. We are the body, and we do that life. We do being the body. We serve one another in love because we're loved. And so gathering to worship is one part of that. So that's, so we've always said the discipleship path is gathering in worship, serving on a team, and joining a group. Like, those are the three aspects that we've promoted. If you read the New Testament, it's like a laundry list of one another's, so there's this whole long list of things. We're trying to just gather those into buckets by pushing those three things. But by saying those three things, we're saying not any one of those is enough.
And so maybe some of this, I mean, we all want to get back together, so this is going to sound dumb, but maybe some of that feeling that I'm having about, and why I have this question based off of what you said, is that we tend to feel like Sunday is enough, we tend to feel like if we don't have Sunday, we're incomplete, or if we don't have Sunday, you know, I don't know. I don't know exactly, but I feel it too. I long to be back together, but I don't know. I feel like
I think like to piggybacking on what Joey's saying, I've just noticed that on Sundays, again, I want to be with everyone like immediately, from my vantage point. But I do think sometimes that we go to on Sunday, there's more about us being fed and more about us being filled. And saying now I have been filled for the week, or whatever terminology you want to use, without actually you doing the pouring. So your motivation to go to church may not be to pour into someone, as it could be I need it for me. So I think it can be probably a lot of times we probably don't want to admit it, but I think sometimes there is this idea of like, I need to go to church for me to get me through the week. I need to hear a word from the Lord, from the pastor, to get me through. And it's not like this idea of like I'm going to serve. I am like I need to go because I'm actually serving someone. My presence there is for someone else's encouragement. Like I have a mission when I go to church, and I think a lot of times because when we're members, how Christ said we're the members of one body. A lot of times, especially in large churches, is that when you say you want to be a member of a church, sometimes you're not even given like a task. Like you're not doing anything. You just like come. And so I think a lot of times, if you're using your gift, if you're exercising your gift, you feel this sense of like responsibility to go because you're there for someone else. So I think sometimes we can miss out on that if we're not leveraging our gifts and being active. And like you say, it's about gathering and serving and joining a team. And serving is the big deal. Like, are you serving? Because that promotes this requirement, this responsibility for you or serving someone else. And I think that propels you to go. But if you're just going to be filled, then this gap right here is going to be like torture because you're not being filled. But if you already been serving, I'm sure people are continuing to serve. They're just doing it in other ways. So yeah.
Yeah,
it made me want to say. You were saying that, Elliot. Sorry. Are you a cul-de-sac or are you an intersection? Right? Is it like I'm being given this truth and this goodness to just it ends with me? I'm done. Okay, cool. I feel better now. Or am I supposed to carry this somewhere else? Right? Anyway, go ahead, Joey.
No, I mean I was just thinking that by way of application, then again, is whatever side you land on in that feeling of what Sundays and why we should be back on Sundays, etc. What does that look like for you then in the future when we come back together? What needs to change for you on Sunday mornings when we're back together? Obviously, what needs to change for you now, we're already talking about that, but you can be thinking about, man, when we are able to gather back together corporately once or more a week, like what does that mean Sundays should look different for me? How should they look different for me? But,
yeah, it's good.
That's good.
Good question to ask.
That's good. It is.
All right, point 3. Your point 3 is how do leaders go wrong? I would say how do we go wrong? Let's change it from leaders to us.
Absolutely.
And this section, I guess, mainly you focused on, again, the cross and Christ and our sin, and God's holiness versus our holiness with a W.
Oh, whole. Yeah. This is really unfolding. Like I said, 2 and 3 go together. It's unfolding more of that, like the purpose, what the body of Christ is. The body of Christ is the temple. We are the temple of God. We are the place where people see God and understand who they are.
Absolutely.
Which affects our role. So just going back to what y'all just said about, do people come just to see God at the temple, or are they the temple? So the church, to press it again, members have no choice but to be the temple or not really be the church. If a member is not really the temple, they're not really the church. They don't really belong to Christ. That's really pressing that role that we have, where we all have responsibility. We're all setting the table. We're all cooks in the kitchen.
Yes. Yeah.
That's huge, man. The temple is the place people go to see God. Like, are we the place people go to see God? I don't think I've ever really just put it that succinctly. I know you're saying, again, it's us as a group, but my personal responsibility is, am I a place God can come to see, or people can come to see God? Like, whew.
All right, if you're part of the building, some of you should be Majestic, right? It's like,
yes,
you should be able to see a corner of the building and go, Italy and the Duomo, like sitting outside at a restaurant. You can look at a corner, a piece of it, and know, man, that is a beautiful building, a beautiful place. I want to see the rest of this building,
I need some help for that. That's for sure.
Should be glowing. Yeah.
It's good.
Well, and so the irony is, when we're obsessed with our own beauty, we become ugly, So that's the whole problem in Corinth. They're like, look at me, I'm gorgeous, I'm awesome. And Paul's like, no, that's not how it works. It's like, that's not how you become beautiful. You actually become the beautiful corner piece by living the life of Christ. That's what made Christ beautiful. That's what makes his church beautiful.
Right. Oh yeah, man, that's so true. We always say that I know Tish and I always say that our lives represent theology. The way we live teaches people about God. Our marriage teaches people about God. I totally agree. It's just the way that you live. Do you live that cruciform life? Because that's how people learn. That's how they see. When unbelievers see your life, and you say you're a Christian, that's how they determine what God. That's how they determine what God look. Who does he look like? Mm-hmm. What is he about? And when you represent that wrong, it can be detrimental. So I think that's a huge deal. It's a big responsibility that we should want to embrace, though. Good pressure.
And we've said it before, but it's always worth saying. I feel like I might offer a translation, not just pride, but self-centeredness, self-focus, because we have to go the other direction too, and say the people who crumble in upon themselves and just think about their shame and their inability to do anything good. That also, right? That's a wrong focus, and that also destroys this beauty of the temple. If I just keep thinking and talking about how terrible I am and God can never do anything in me, Does that make sense? Like I'm trying to hit both sides of it. It's not just the people who are puffed up with self. It's the people who are a black hole of self that need to be careful, right?
Yeah. True. That's next week's sermon, baby.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, is it? Oh,
Come
wow.
back next time.
Welcome to Sunday Precap.
It's the
but that's good,
next week's sermon is the section that Tim Keller used in the little book. We did a little 2-week study of it a couple years ago called The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness.
Yes.
So yeah, he hits on that. Yeah, on both sides. Either there's the puffed up pride, or like Chris was saying, like the black hole of I'm terrible. It's another kind of pride.
Yeah. That's good.
All right. Other thoughts, ideas?
My neck hurts so bad.
Poor Dave.
Was there something else?
Man, this is maybe unhinged from much, but it's come up in my head a lot, is that I feel like one key thing about leaders that I watch and notice over and over again is leaders have the humility to try and to be willing to risk, right? Like even you were saying, Dave, like this is a perfect example of your like, I didn't word it perfectly, but you know what? You got up and preached the sermon, and and God can use that. And so I just want people to be encouraged over and over again. The thing you can't avoid as a leader is doing something and it's not going to be perfect. And that's the beauty of God, working all things for good is like, here I go, and I feel that every single Sunday. This isn't the perfect version of this song, but I'm singing it and hopefully it helps somebody,
Yeah.
So
That's so true.
Here's a
So good.
I wonder did Paul ever think that he like failed on a mission? You know, because a lot of times as Christians, what you're saying is like, hey, you got to risk it, and it may seem like you have failed, but a lot of times God is using, He could use wins or whatever if your perception of failure for His, for your good and for His glory. So, but I wonder did Paul ever think, man, I missed that, man, I failed at that mission trip, on that mission trip or something, or anything like that? Because I think that a lot of times that's our fear. We have this fear of failure. And I think a lot of it comes from just not depending on God, just saying that God is the one, like Paul is saying, God is the one that gets the glory for the growth. So I don't have to worry about that. All I got to do is just try. I just got to I don't have to risk it enough and give it over to God. But I think when we go into it with this, I'm going to do it on my own talent and my skill and merit. And then if you fail, then it's this sense of like, man, I let someone down. But so I think, man, you're exactly right. We just have to just do it, just try. Whatever God is putting on your heart, try.
I mean, that's the whole beginning of like, it's God that does the growing. And I was like, well, there's this thing because we love to be really efficient as Americans, and we're like, I did this thing and the outcome was this, and I measured it and it was perfect, and so I'll keep doing this thing in this way so I'll get that outcome. And it's like, this can feel crazy making, because at some level, yes, you can be aware of what God's doing, but at the same time, you can't just say, unless I get immediate, huge, measurable results, I'm failing and I didn't do the right thing. There's just this crazy, like, I will be faithful. God has told me what to do. I'm going to keep doing it, like.
I think there's a beautiful subtext in 1st and 2nd Corinthians. When you read Acts and read the stories before, the stories after, read what happened to Paul, how God personally encouraged him, like, hey, dude, don't give up. I got more people for you here.
That's true.
I think the Corinthians were more obsessed with flash and leadership giftedness, and God purposely said, okay, I'm going to give you the weakest, most broken version of Paul, more than any other city. They're going to get fear and trembling Paul. And so there's a sense in which that like applies universally, and Paul always had fear and trembling and relied on the cross and not his gifts. But I think God uniquely gave Paul you're going to feel really weak and stupid in this place so that you can depend on me even more. And they're going to need that, like they're going to need that version of you more than the powerful, strong, healthy Paul. So
that's true. I used to have this thing I used to draw for encouragement in ministry, where I would draw a line and I would always say like faithfulness, 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 fruit. Faithfulness, 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 fruit. Like you're gonna have more faithfulness than you are gonna have fruit. So you just have to just keep going, and just because you never know when that fruit will manifest. But just keep being faithful. So that's something that I would draw and kind of look at when I would get discouraged about different results. We'll be a result-oriented culture, and that was just remind me like you have to be faithful to the mission that God gives you, and the results are for God and God alone. The results will take care of themselves. Just be faithful. So that's what helps me a lot.
Good.
Our song next week for our kids' song is going to be the Store Up Your Treasures in Heaven song. Store up for yourself treasures in heaven.
Yes.
Where moth and rust
Christ is our
cannot
greatest
destroy.
reward, but I am not going to deny that the Bible teaches we get rewards.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Anything
the joy
else?
set before.
Yes.
One more piece that came out in the commentaries that I wish I'd mentioned. The builders and buildings took years and decades in the first century, not
generations, even
6 months, right? Generations.
6 months.
So
6 months.
so like we throw up a house in a few months, we throw up a major building in 6 months. They did not, so
think of
so
it
the
more
whole
like
faithful
I-35
farmer-
being developed, right?
Yeah. yeah. The 47-year project I've been watching.
Your children and your children and their children and their children.
So
that one.
That helps, I think.
Good.
Because farming is definitely I got to rely on God. I plant, I water, I weed, but God makes it grow. Well, with building, it's this long, patient process, also in the first century context. So yeah, both analogies fit that kind of patience thing.
Man. Let me say one thing there too. I ran across and it was struck by. It was like, man, I want to be. I think some other church cultures can be so good at this, of like pointing out in other believers what you see them doing. I just think of these people that raise up other generations, and like they may be. I've seen these church leaders that like they didn't get the limelight, but they were the ones who like poked another person and said, "You're good at that. You need to go do that. You're good at that, man. When you do that, something happens. Go." And like, I want to encourage our body to do that. Again, different tribes may do it better or worse, but we need that. We need people prayerfully following the Holy Spirit's lead to poke other people and raise them up as leaders too, right?
Yeah. For real. Elliot's got a book.
Kids. He got excited. He's running.
You got a book on that subject, Elliot?
He doesn't have headphones on yet.
You got a book, Elliot?
Yes. This book right here. I don't know if you said mentor like Jesus. This is exactly what Chris is talking about. This guy says the subtitle is his radical approach to building the church. This guy here was not an elder, a pastor, or anything, but he would take men, he would choose them, and he would mentor them for like a year. And he would just every month he would go through these mentorship things, and at the end he's been doing it for years. I mean, like years. And he said the fruit of that has become elders, pastors, senators, all types of things. And he is not renowned. He's just, I won't say just the guy, but he's just there. He's a leader. But he's not in the limelight. He just mentors people. So it's a really good book that I definitely recommend. And he learned that because he said that he was mentoring guys individually, and he said, man, that's just not working because it was taking too much of his time. So he brought men together, and he began to mentor them, and he's just a part of the body,
Say the whole title and author.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's the author is Reggie Campbell, and the title is Mentor Like Jesus: His Radical Approach to Building the Church. And the foreword is by Andy Stanley. So,
really good. I read another book like that called Designed to Lead, and it was about how the church needs to develop church leaders, but also needs to just develop leaders, period, in all areas of life. I think it's really important.
Sweet.
Cultural mandate. All areas of life.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We're done, I think.
That's it.
Boom.
That's it. Time flies when you're talking with Elliot and Dave. I'll tell you what. It's fun. Thank you guys for joining us. Thanks, Elliot, for coming again this week. I think we'll just have a standing engagement as long as Richie Ray's asleep. Elliot's going to join us.
Absolutely.
We'd love to have
and
you.
That's our Danny.
Well, thanks to everyone who joined us online live and who will listen to this podcast later. We look forward to seeing everybody on our live stream this Sunday morning and seeing all you in person on our lawn on Sunday evening this week. So we'll be out in the grass in the parking lot. You could sit in your car if you want. You could bring a blanket. We'll be spread out by families, doing good social distancing. Do us a favor and stay away from other people, but be together with us. We love you guys. We miss you guys. We look forward to being back with you guys, and we will talk to you later.